Regan Slaymaker for International Boxing News, and I have the pleasure to be joined by Charlie Sims. Charlie, how are you today, mate?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very, very well, thank you. I mean, the weather looks a lot better in LA than it does in the UK at the moment.
Yeah. The sun's finally came out. It hasn't been great the last few months, but this week it's been really nice. So I'm glad I'm out of the doom and gloom because I thought I was back in Essex at one point.
I mean, with the sun like that, I don't think anyone wants to be in Essex at the moment, mate. But no, we'll begin with a few tweets from yourself today regarding Cyrus Pattinson. I mean, I was ringside for his fight with Chris Jenkins. I mean, what a fight that was! But you teased his return in August. Could that potentially be the rumored Conor Walker fight for August 19?
Yeah, first of all, the Jenkins fight was an absolute war. Just touching back on that, it was a great fight when we made the Jenkins fight, and I think it was always going to be one of those crossroads fights, like the young guy coming through and the kind of vet on his way out. And I think we expected Jenkins to give him some good rounds, but Cyrus's engine and just youth's going to come through, and he's gonna eventually get on top of him and get him out there. Well, that wasn't the case. Jenkins was extremely strong, had plenty left in the tank, and he made it a very, very hard night's work. But that being said, there are a lot of people who praised Cyrus because I think there were a lot of questions that were asked in that fight that people weren't really sure about. So he had to go through it, dig deep, had to ask some questions of, is the pro game, albeit how successful he was as an amateur, that was his biggest fight to date in the pro game, and how far can he really go? So he came through it successfully, and now it's just about building that momentum. That was his first headline in the Northeast, and we want to keep going with that. There's a stay busy fight with the Conor Walker fight, who, albeit in his own right, he'll be a tough fight as well. Definitely give Cyrus some rounds. But the big fight that I think we're in early discussions for is the Lewis Ritson fight. And I think if we can do Cyrus Pattinson, Lewis Ritson in the Northeast, it's going to be a mega passing of the torch fight. We all know what Ritson brings: tough customer, gets stuck in, doesn't take a backward step, and I think we've all seen that from Cyrus's style as well. So no doubt that fight will be an absolute war, and we're hopefully going to aim towards the end of the year, if not early 2024.
100%. I mean, if the Chris Jenkins fight wasn't a passing of the torch fight, that fight is definitely, with Lewis Ritson, one of the passing of the torch fights I've ever seen. Does that fight for you sell out the Newcastle arena?
I think it certainly does good numbers. I mean, Cyrus Pattinson alone done, I can't remember how many thousand was in the arena last time, but if you combine his ticket sales and also Ritson's previous, following, you've got to fancy that it does big numbers. The styles alone, it's not going to be a boxer versus a fighter. It's going to be two fighters meeting head to head, locking horns. So I think overall, it's going to be one of those fights that's either a step too soon for Cyrus Pattinson, or maybe it's one too late for Ritson. I think people are probably leaning towards the latter, but Cyrus knows it's a real fight. He's discussing it with me. He's talking about it. He's done plenty of rounds of sparring with Ritson over the years. He knows he's a tough customer. They know each other very well. So it's going to be a hard fight.
Well, 100%. I mean, with considering as well, Lewis's last fight was a world title eliminator that has now catapulted O'Hara Davis. I mean, what a fight that would be for Cyrus's career, and also so early on. I think people forget sometimes that I think that would only be his like 10th fight. I think is less than that.
Yeah, probably less than that. I think he's only had 6. So if you get another one in August, it might be his 8th fight. Maybe one more before could be his 9th fight. So to jump through the levels that quickly, bearing in mind Ritson's last fight was a world title final eliminator. You're jumping through domestic European straight into that fringe world level scene. So it's a big step up, Cyrus. He needs to get some rounds in before, but I think he'll be ready come the end of the year, early 2024 for that fight.
100%, and that is definitely a fight that I'm looking forward to. We'll move on to kind of John Ryder. I mean, what a performance against Canelo Alvarez in Guadalajara. I mean, aside from the scorecards, which in my opinion I think didn't do John's performance any favors. But I mean, he's a gorilla with a jungle full of options. I think your dad mentioned Caleb Plant to me. And then also you tweeted today that kind of initial discussions with Golovkin in Kazakhstan have started. I mean, what a fight that would be for John.
Yeah, I had John on the phone yesterday, hence why the tweets went out. And we were kind of just going through one, we kind of relived that performance a little bit because we hadn't really spoken about it since. And, you know, just as a fighter manager relationship goes, you put everything into those big fights. The big fights happen, and then everybody goes on their holidays, and the fighter goes on their holidays, and then the manager kind of goes on to the next fight. So I was kind of working with other people, doing other stuff, and we kind of went through it yesterday. We had a good catch up and just relive those moments a little bit. Such a huge event. Like, I've been to some huge events here, in the UK and around the world. You know, I've been to Anthony Joshua's Klitschko fight, 80,000 people at Wembley. I've been to Froch Groves 2 at Wembley. I've done Madison Square Garden with AJ Ruiz. I've done some big fights around the world. But going to Mexico, Guadalajara, in the hometown of ultimately and arguably the face of boxing, Canelo Alvarez, was an experience that we'll never forget. And in my mind, even going through the moments with him yesterday, it was almost as if I was still there. It was something you will just never forget. And just the way he performed, I actually thought it was a really good performance. I think he won the hearts of the Mexican people and everybody else in the boxing community. The nose was undoubtedly the changing point of the fight. I think actually I knew the game plan going into the fight. He started the first couple of rounds quite well. He didn't really take many backward steps. He was using his defense. He was getting his jab off a lot quicker than what we thought. If you watch John's previous fights, he's a slow starter. So he's not used to letting his hands go early. And I think he was starting to find a rhythm. He felt that Canelo wasn't as fast as he thought he was. So he was growing in confidence. And it was just that last shot on the bell, second round, bam, the fight changed. And obviously his nose was busted. He knew it immediately when he walked back to the corner. The corner knew it immediately. And it was like, okay, well, how do we deal with this? Because this isn't something you practice for in boxing. And certainly being hit by one of the most devastating punches in the 168-pound division and one of the pound-for-pound kings who is probably going to try and finish you now that he smelled blood. How do you deal with that? And he kind of went through, you know, he couldn't breathe through his nose, and it took him a couple of rounds to figure out how to hold his breath and throw shots because he couldn't breathe through those moments. How he'd come back to the corner and sitting down on the stool weren't working for him, so he'd had to stand up in the middle of rounds. Just trying to figure out how to, you know, navigate through that injury, and he did such a good job. You know, the corner was super experienced. They kept him super calm. Tony knew, or has that relationship with John, that he knew he wasn't hurt enough to pull him out of the fight. He knew that this was his big opportunity and they were going to work through it and get through it. And I feel like they did. He lost a few rounds in between. It got hard. He went to deep waters, especially between 7 and 9. I felt like Canelo was really trying to get him out there after the knockdown in the 5th. And then I feel like John realized, actually, do you know what? You've hit me with your best shots here, and you still can't keep me down. And I'm going to keep getting up. I'm going to keep fighting. And that's when the beating of the chest come out, that iconic moment. And I just feel like he thought, I'm going to give this my best shot. And he mentioned something to me yesterday, and he actually mentioned it in another interview. He could have stayed down in the 5th. It wouldn't have made any difference financially if it had stayed down in the 5th. But he decided that he was going to give it his best go, and he did, and he won a lot of hearts of the people, and it was a great fight. And I think now the boxing community in itself are looking at John Ryder as one of the hardest fights in the 168-pound division. Not many people go 12 rounds with Canelo. That's a fact. Look at his last 10 fights. So, you know, who's out there for him? Ultimately, Canelo's now signed to PBC. That's what the rumor is. You've got, there was news breaking that Benavidez was going to potentially fight Munguia. Now I'm reading Benavidez might fight Morel. And now I'm reading Benavidez has been ordered to fight Berlanga in a final eliminator, which makes things very interesting. Whoever requested that, I want to know. I don't think Berlanga's ready for that fight by any means after his last performance. And me and John kind of went through that as well. We was talking about the Berlanga performance. We talked about the Munguia performance. We talked about Caleb Plant, that we haven't heard back from their PBC and the team since reaching out. Haven't heard back from Munguia since reaching out. Berlanga, the communication that I'm getting from Matchroom is that he doesn't really want the John Ryder fight. He kind of feels like the Munguia fight might be an easier fight. And I think that's understandable off the back of their two last performances. So, yeah, John Ryder's in a good position, but he's in the kind of position with who needs him. You know, I think them kind of guys, Munguia, Berlanga, will be looking at him thinking, I don't know, maybe we should just fight each other instead of fighting him. The one fight that we love, and I would love to see John in, is the Golovkin fight. I think it's just, when you look at resumes and you look at this era and you look at John Ryder's resume, he wants to say he's been in with the best, win, lose, or draw. He wants to be remembered for being in those blockbuster fights. And Golovkin, albeit might be in the later stages of his career, will go down as a Hall of Famer, and definitely in the middleweight division. His trilogy with Canelo Alvarez was iconic in this era. And I think John Ryder wants to be in and around those names when people look back at this era. So he's put it out there. He wants to fight Golovkin. Matchroom have made contact with Golovkin's team to say that John Ryder will fight him anywhere, or even if he has to go to Kazakhstan, John Ryder has no problem doing that. So we want that fight, and let's see where we get to with it.
100%. I think even with kind of Golovkin vacating his middleweight title belts, I think a homecoming in Kazakhstan at super middleweight, where there's kind of no pressure from him to be ordered by other governing bodies, because obviously I think we know Golovkin's earned the right to kind of do what he wants without the belts. He's still got the pull, and I think a fight with John Ryder in Kazakhstan is very, very likely.
Hope so, because, you know, if we're not fighting Golovkin and we're calling out names, and people like Berlanga and Munguia, they're just not up for it. Plant, I'm pretty sure, would be. I don't know what Plant's up to. I'm sure they've got some plans that side, but I actually think the Plant Ryder fight is a great fight. It would be a clash of two different styles. I'm a big fan of Caleb Plant. I think he fell short against Benavidez, but he had a great fight with Canelo, and I think, being a former champion, it would be a good fight. It would be a good fight, so I want to see that. I also want to see Billy Joe Saunders come back, because I feel like the Billy Joe Saunders Ryder fight rematch would be a big fight in London. But I feel like Billy Joe needs to come back and have a good fight with somebody, just to kind of get 10, 12 rounds under his belt. I would like to see that fight as well. Maybe it could be the last Ryder fight. But if we can get Golovkin in or Plant in, and then the Billy Joe Saunders fight, I think that would certainly round off a brilliant resume for John Ryder.
100%. And even, we don't know if Canelo would be keeping hold of all of those belts. Maybe one of them could be for a vacant title. We never know. But honestly, after John Ryder's last few performances, can't wait to see him back in the ring. Honestly, I think he's always in a great fight. I was there for the Jacobs fight, Ali Pali. I thought it was an unbelievable performance. I do want to move on to kind of Conor Benn. Obviously, there was an article that released with the Times with Matt Lawton, and kind of I'm gonna paraphrase a few things because it is a longer read, but I'll link it in the bio of this interview. But kind of the long and short of it is that kind of Dr. Kayoglu, one of the doctors that Team Ben have hired to do their independent investigation, he's concluded that it was unfair to blame Conor Benn due to his positive doping test for clomiphene. And he concluded that a combination of Conor's unique biological makeup and a contamination of clomiphene-induced eggs caused the positive urine test from VADA. Just want to get your opinions on kind of both articles as well. So there's one kind of more the technical side of things of the positive test, and concluding of the combination of Conor's makeup and the contamination side of things. And then also the other article kind of about kind of what Conor has gone through within the last few months since the fallout of Eubank Jr. versus Benn?
Yeah, I think, look, we'll cover the first one and then we'll go into the second one, because the second one's actually very important. They're both equally important, but from a mental standpoint, I think it's something that people need to actually acknowledge when we're discussing this topic. So, first of all, yes, he
brought in a new team. I've seen a lot of people who've been almost chasing Conor down in a way of he's guilty, and unless he's proven innocent, blah, 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 now kind of eating their words a little bit. Because what that team did was basically break down scientifically the difference. And this is for everybody who doesn't want to read the article. I'll just break it down for you, so it's very easy to understand. They broke down the difference between taking a tablet orally and eating or digesting what would be contaminated meat, eggs, and they've shown the difference in terms of how much was in his system. I'm just trying to not get too scientific about it, but they've shown the difference between how much was in his system compared to if you orally took a tablet or if you digested meat or eggs, basically, and it's matched up with the meat and eggs contamination, okay? One of the problems that we're facing now is, one, the UCAD case is still ongoing, so that new information will be communicated to UCAD. UCAD then can make their own decision on what or how they feel they want to conclude this case. I think, given the new evidence, it would be very difficult to say that he took that even accidentally. Because how can you actually control eating chicken or eggs? It's just like, it's part of, let alone an athlete's diet, it's part of most people's diet. So it's very difficult to go to a supermarket, go on holiday, be eating chicken and eggs, whatever, and then there's a contamination in it that stays in your system for 4 to 6 months. And in that time, you're doing tests and it's being picked up. So the people that I've been watching that are, or have been advocating against Conor, their new kind of terminology is, well, why didn't they just do this in the first place a year ago? Because it takes a lot of time to figure out how these things work. Also, there doesn't happen to be these teams everywhere that you can just go and pick up and go through these sort of cases. This case was extremely complex. It was difficult. Moving forward, yeah, if this happens again to somebody else, I'm sure there's more of a blueprint, but there weren't a blueprint to follow. There weren't many people that had been through this. There weren't people you could ring and call and ask for their advice. There was lots of different people throwing their advice and into the hat, but it was like, it wasn't matching up with what we needed. So, you know, I think Conor's done a really good job. It's been really tough for him. He's been under a lot of pressure to deliver to the boxing community and probably the sports community. I think this has probably been one of the biggest anti-doping cases around the world in sport. And I'm glad that finally there looks like there's light at the end of the tunnel, because for a long time, the young man was probably thinking, what is going on here? I haven't done anything intentionally. I certainly don't think I've even done it accidentally. So how are we going to get to the bottom with this? And he's under a lot of pressure from the British Boxing Board of Control and UCAD, who, for me, seem like they just want to make an example of him, purely because of how high profile the case was. I think he felt unfairly treated, and that's why he, in the beginning, was very much like, F you, I'm going to do what I need to do. But also, he just wanted a fair trial and a fair case. And we're going to get a hearing, which is probably going to be in July. And UCAD are going to have to take all of this evidence and scientific conclusion on board and make a decision. and hopefully it will be the fair and right one. I don't know what that is, but I think he hasn't done anything intentionally. I've always supported him. There's been a lot of difficult conversations going on in and around this camp. It hasn't been he's come out and charged for an anti-doping case and we've all just backed him. We've backed him based upon the conversations that we've had as a team. And those conversations, especially in the early days, were very, very difficult. We were asking, well, in particularly, Tony was asking a lot of deep questions about what had gone on here, how this could have happened, how we don't support this sort of stuff in our gym team, how Matchroom obviously don't support this stuff. And we watched and we went through and we understood and we listened and we accepted what he said from the beginning. We knew that he weren't lying. So, you know, we just had to support him, go through this process. We've always wanted him to kind of get to the bottom of it, get through it. And I feel like, as I said, there's a light at the end of the tunnel now. This new team have come in. They're saying they've proved it. It's scientifically proved. People can say what they want about the proof. Science is what we trust anyway in the anti-doping protocol. So science now proving that he may not have even intentionally or accidentally ingested this. We have to listen to it and take it on board. And moving forward, I do think there needs to be some changes made. I do think there needs to be some changes made with the British Boxing Board of Control. I do think there needs to be some changes made within the VADA testing program, which I'm sure will come out as part of Conor's evidence over time. But that's for Conor Benn to explain. And yeah, I'm just going on to the second part of the question that you asked. He has been through a lot. He came out publicly and said that he felt suicidal. Now, I don't care who you are, what job role you're in. You can be a professional fighter or whatever. Nobody should have to feel like that and go through that. Especially in this era with social media where everybody's so quick to judge and have an opinion. I don't feel like a young man should have to go through something like that, especially when he's trying to prove his innocence. So, you know, I don't feel like that was taken on board. I did know about it. I did know about it way beyond, well, way before that was even mentioned in that Times article. This was something that my dad mentioned to me many months ago, saying that he's on basically suicide watch at the moment. And we all have to make sure that he's okay and check in with him, which I feel like we all did. And ultimately, he's had help. You know, he's had some clinical and psychiatric help, and he's had people who have stood by him, who have supported him, good friends around him. I think it might have given, you know, even though let's take the case out of it, it's probably given Conor Benn a good indication of who the real people are around him and who the people jumping on the bandwagon and hyping him, you know. And I think he was on that. He was on that certainly with his last few performances, knockouts against Algeria, Van Heerden. People were hyping him. And I think this kind of came around and it might have helped him realize who the inner circle really is, who's going to really help him through not just the good times, but the bad times too. So look, we're kind of coming towards the end of this case now. So I'm hoping in July, UCAD and the board do the right thing and we can get this Eubank clash made for September 23rd. It's rumoured to be at Tottenham Hotspur. I know that Matchroom definitely have been having discussions with the stadium and the people at Tottenham. So it would only feel like a great achievement just to get there in the end, and just to be in front of 60,000 plus fans, where I think it deserves to be. I think the O2 originally was always too small, albeit we sold it out, highest grossing ticket sales ever in the history of the O2. We were looking at doing it in the Middle East. It was very unclear about how we were going to do it. And I don't think anybody was trying to jump through any loopholes. It was just that it was a very different deal to the O2. We were relying on big pay-per-view sales with the zone for the O2. Whereas in the Middle East, we were getting a really big guarantee. So it was just very different. And that's a lot of the reason why people go to the Middle East. That these big heavyweight fights are going there, because they're getting huge money guaranteed without relying on pay-per-view. So it wasn't just about jumping through hoops and trying to cheat the system. It was about actually the deal made financially a lot of sense. So it's certainly something we can revisit. But I think one of the big things that's always been a bit of a thorn in the side was just this UCAD case hanging over us. And I think Conor, Matchroom, everybody involved didn't really want to do this fight necessarily with that hanging over us. I think there was always this is going to have to come to an end at some point, and let's see how and when we can do that. And July seems to be the date that we're aiming towards. But I think from Eubank's team, Matchroom, our team, we always wanted to do this in the UK. And maybe this time around, the fight will be bigger and we can do it at Tottenham. But, you know, the fight, one of the things that actually I just want to mention, and this is another thing that we get a lot of criticism for, it's like, how can you make fights with this hanging over you? It's morally incorrect. The fights aren't made. They're just talk and rumoured and hearsay. We want to make the fight, but obviously there's things in the way that are stopping us from making the fight. Now, Conor Benn can go to America and fight if he wants to. He can go to the Middle East and fight if he wants to. But he wants this fight, and he wants to do it in the UK. So we've gone through a process, and hopefully we're coming to the end of that process to make this fight. And once that process is complete, we will get into negotiations, and we will complete a deal for that fight. So just for everybody who's criticising, the fight was never made. It was always a rumoured fight. We rumoured to go to the Middle East. We're rumoured to go to Tottenham. Yes, hopefully once the case is concluded, we can then resume with making a deal and making the fight.
Perfect. I mean, I will echo a few things you said there. Obviously the article kind of does break it down scientifically, and and I will link it if everyone listening would like to listen, read that article, because it does break it down in fundamental detail and does go through kind of the trade practices with food and the current climate of what's going on at the moment to back up the case as well. And I mean the secondary point thing, echo all of your statements there, Charlie. I mean, no one, whether athlete or not, regarding this circumstance, should feel like that. And I know that your team have kind of, we'll get on to kind of Felix Cash's comeback in a minute, but your team have hired Greg Meehan, the mindset coach, as well, a very pivotal part of the team now as well.
The team's something that we've been developing for a long time. And I think this is why the Matchroom gym in particularly has been so successful for such a long run. If you look at like Tony Sims's career he's been in the game 30 years, but let's look at the last 15 years, right? And let's look at the last few cycles. It tends to go in 4 or 5 years due to the Olympics, but his last 3 to 4 cycles have been really strong, even from back in the Darren Barker days right through to today. If you look at other coaches in and around Tony Sims's age and era, there've been a lot of that have come and gone. There's been some that have had really good fighters and been at the top, and then they've faded off when the cycle kind of came around and they're trying to rebuild. Tony Sims has been constantly rebuilding, recycling. And that's why his name for the last at least 15 years has been at the top of the tree. He took on this role of being a top head coach in a gym where you can kind of have the vets who are people like John Ryder, and you've kind of got these young, hungry prospects coming through who are like your Maisey Roses, your George Liddards, who are looking very, very good. And the blend between the two is what brings, one, the hunger in the vets because they're getting chased by the younger guys. And also it gives those younger guys the environment they need to understand how a champion walks in and out of the ring, how they compose themselves in the camp, how they compose themselves as a professional. That's the environment we try to always have in the gym, and that works in cycles. Now, to develop a team like that, you have to have certain aspects to the gym. a really good, solid head coach, somebody who's been through all the eras. Tony Sims is a boxing historian. He knows fights from back in the early 1920s, 30s. He can talk to you about all of the different styles, different fighters, different eras. And he brings that into today's era. And he's also took on adaptation and involvement. And 5 or 10 years ago, S&C coaches, they didn't exist. Commercial agents didn't exist. Mindset coaches didn't exist. These people have, Tony Sims has adapted and worked with me as well to develop a team of people that ultimately you would see in a high-performing NBA, NFL, multi-million-dollar football team. You know, that's the kind of team that we've tried to build. And it's very attractive for fighters to come to our gym because they know when they step through the door, they're going to get a quality head coach. They're going to get a gym with all the facilities that they need to train at the highest level. The best S&C coach, in my opinion, in Dan Lawrence, who's extremely successful and has been for the last at least 5 years in boxing. You've got mindset coach who specializes in athletes with Greg Meehan, who no doubt is going to be one of the biggest mindset coaches in our sport over the next probably few years. And then you've got me. I've been in the sport for 10 years. I've learned from the best in the game and make the biggest deals. You know, so together as a team, we've been working really hard to develop these big nights and these big fighters. And there's no secret that success has come. You know, look at the last few fights. We've had John Ryder Canelo. We've had John Ryder Zach Parker, John Ryder Danny Jacobs, Joe Cordina Rakhimov, Joe Cordina Ogawa. You've had Felix Cash, British and Commonwealth champion. You've got Conor Benn, who was on that amazing run with Van Heerden, Algieri, looking at fighting Chris Eubank Jr. You know, them fights alone are just multi-million-dollar grossing fights. There's not probably a gym that has grossed as much money as we have in the last 2 to 3 years. And if there is, I'd like to know. If there is, I'd like to know who they are. But I think that also comes from a great support system in Matchroom Boxing, who have believed in Tony for one, believed that he would always bring through great fighters, train them to the highest level, and that's why we're so successful. Greg Meehan's been an amazing addition to our team, and like I said, he's going to keep growing. And there's another name I'm going to throw out to you called Alex Elvy, who's working very closely with Dan Lawrence, and he at the moment is going to be a name that I think is going to be a big SSC coach at some point in the boxing division as well. And he's working very closely with Maisey Courteney. He's working very closely with George Liddard, Kevin Mitchell's son, who's going to come through and turn pro at some point. And he's going to be a big name too. I've worked with him quite a bit over the last year. So, you know, we're working with younger guys, younger talent. And that's what we're good at. We're good at cycles and bringing through and adapting to the new era of boxing.
100%. I think the combination of the team that you guys have in the Matchroom gym is so strong. And even going down there, like I was saying to you off camera, for a Saturday boot camp session, you even see with us guys in there who go into the gym just on a Saturday, the close-knit team is so strong. Just picking that up. We have been on the call for a long time and I haven't upgraded Zoom, so we'll jump back in with the interview with Charlie Sims. So just to conclude, Charlie, we were just discussing all the Conor Benn situation, the article with the Times, the Chris Eubank Jr. fight. I will have to ask, kind of, if the hearing with UCAD kind of and the board wouldn't go in your favour, and kind of do you think the fight would land in Abu Dhabi? Like you said, Conor is clear to fight in other regions, or is it very much your intention? I know your dad has said to me that it's very much the priority to be cleared to fight in the UK. Do you think that fight would land in Abu Dhabi, or do you think would it be best for you guys that fight landed in the UK?
I think, talking on behalf of the team here, I think it would be disappointing, considering how hard Conor's worked to try and clear his name in the UK. it would be disappointing, one, to receive that kind of news from UCAD and the board, and two, not be able to do the fight in the UK. I think if we were going to jump through a loophole, we could have done that 6 months ago, maybe even longer, and the fight could have happened. So it would be disappointing to even have to go there. But I don't know. You're gonna have to wait and see, I suppose. I think the problem is we don't know what the board and the UK are going to say. So until that decision has been made and that has been officially concluded, it's very hard to say. What I wouldn't like to see is if he has provided evidence that he has actually proved his innocence, it would be very hard to stop a man from earning money from a legal aspect. But we'll see, because I think obviously it's been quite hostile with the board and Conor. So I'm hoping that now they've got this new team in. I'm hoping that that's going to help, and there's going to be a real good line of communication with UCAD, and we're going to wrap this up. And I'm hoping that the next fight we will be talking about will be Ben Eubank at Tottenham Hotspur.
100%, and so do we. And I'll echo, like I said in the first part of the interview, if you haven't read that article breaking down kind of the Conor's and Team Ben's kind of the scientists that they've hired to kind of conclude and concluding the contamination around Conor's physique and the contaminated foodstuffs, please do, because at the end of the day, we aren't scientists, they are, and they're the experts in this situation. I would like to move on to Felix Cash now. I mean, in my opinion, one of the most exciting middleweights in the country. Obviously, but he did have to pull out for his European title fight with Signani on the AJ card. But we've just mentioned Greg Meehan there. I mean, but back in camp now, back with the right mindset, and it's looking like Ammo Williams next.
Yeah, the Ammo Williams fight was always supposed to happen. I think, and I guess this is for Felix really to explain, but I'll try and explain it the best I can. He hit a few speed bumps, let's just say, in his personal life, and he was on that great run, amazing performance against Denzel Bentley. Just devastating, completely obliterated him on an away show. Took the British title, and Denzel Bentley's gone on to do great things. He had that really good fight against for the WBO world title, and they went the distance. And I think he's done really well since to rebuild himself. But for me, he just Felix just hit too many roadblocks in his personal life, and that was fair enough. He kind of explained that to us, and he's gone through a bit of a process. But every time he's kind of come back into the gym, come back into those kind of opportunities, which for me, Signani was just a perfect opportunity to come back and throw yourself in the mix. He's a European champion. He's 40 years old, maybe older. I think he might have been 42. I think, the Felix Cash that turns up against Denzel Bentley would have obliterated him in a couple of rounds, and it would have just been great momentum for him. And that was kind of what that fight was about, and that's why we kind of pushed for that fight. And then it was always going to lead on to the Ammo Williams fight. But, got into fight week, and again, those personal issues came up for Felix. He'll have to explain what actually happened. But it just made sense for him not to fight. We turned around. Obviously, it was disappointing to do a whole camp and obviously not get into fight night and get into the ring and perform. But we turned around and we made a decision to say, well, Felix, you're extremely talented. You've got a good team around you, but there's something stopping you from getting to that finish line. So I feel like if we're going to do this, and certainly going to go for a new camp, and if we're going to be talking about world, contenders like Ammo Williams, we need to make sure that you're not just physically in the best shape, but you're also mentally in the best shape. And we're going to support you and put you through that. So we brought Greg Meehan on again, who's an integral part of our team. Greg's been having sessions with him throughout camp, and he's going to be spending the entire week with him throughout fight week. And we see that with John Ryder. And I think John Ryder was probably the best example of how this can work, you know, a big occasion. These fighters they fight for a living, but they're normal people, you know, like you and I, when they're outside the gym. And I don't care what anybody says. Me and you would struggle to walk out in front of 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people. Nobody's trained for that. You can't train for that in the gym. So, you know, when these fighters get to fight week, there's obviously a lot of press commitments. You come face to face with the reality of the fight. You know, the ring walk, the changing rooms, the environment of just being in and around it. It can be quite challenging for people. And we've decided that we can get you in the best shape physically that you can be in for a 12-round fight. You look at all of our guys; they're conditioned to fight 15 rounds, maybe more. But mentally, we need to make sure they're in the best mind frame. And that doesn't necessarily mean all of our guys, you know, aren't mentally capable of doing these big fights. John Ryder could have not done that camp with Greg Meehan and still got in the ring with Conah that night and still performed maybe the same. But I think just having that extra support system, that external person to talk to, not just about boxing, but just about life, and just recognizing that these athletes are real people and they have homes and families and relationships that, you know, boxing, they give their whole life to boxing. Boxing is a very demanding sport, but it's also a very short career, and you need to get the absolute most you can out of the game before it ends. And it can be taken away from you at any point, not just when you're old and on the slide. Injuries come along, personal issues come along. We've seen so many fighters walk away from the sport and just be in big fights and then all of a sudden just go missing overnight. We don't want that to ever happen in our gym. We want this to be an environment where people thrive and they achieve the absolute best out of themselves and fulfill their own potential. So that was a big part of bringing Greg Meehan into Felix Cash's camp. This is the first camp that they've worked across, and I think we've seen a huge improvement. He's turning up into training. He's firing on all cylinders. We weren't seeing that particularly in his last couple of camps. And he seems like he's kind of that old Felix Cash that went in with Denzel Bentley again. And I think, honestly, if we can get that guy back, the Ammo Williams doesn't have a chance. He's a good fighter. He presents his own qualities in the fight. But I'm telling you now, the Felix Cash that turns up against Denzel Bentley, Ammo Williams doesn't have a chance.
100%. I mean, it's a great fight for Felix and Ammo, a real 50-50. But like I said before I started talking about Felix, he is one of the most exciting middleweights on the, if not on the planet, in the country. And I would back him when he's on his day, like you said, and when everything's give him a strong argument to beat most middleweights. Would that fight is that fight rumored to land on the upcoming AJ card in August? I
think so. I think it was kind of like originally the co-main for Fabio Wardley when they were trying to make that Fabio Wardley versus whoever card. And then now that I'm not sure what's going on with Fabio Wardley, but now it seems to have moved on to the AJ card, and it's going to be a co-main on the AJ card, which is a great fight. So let's put it on the biggest stage. Let's let these two go at it because they've got a bit of spite with each other. So let's see the fight week press conference and let them get in the ring and have a good fight on a huge stage.
Definitely. And if Felix doesn't call Ammo a jackass again, I'll be thoroughly disappointed. I mean, we'll move on to Joe Cordina now. I mean, unbelievable fight against Shavkat Rakhimov in April. I mean, obviously we'll talk about the fight, but now, I mean, after that performance, deserving and kind of on the hunt for unifications as well, hopefully.
That was always the plan. And I think that's something that Joe feels very strongly about. He feels in his mind that he's faced two proven world champions, even though he lost his belt and he never technically lost it in the ring. He felt like he was going in against a proven world champion. You know, Rakhimov came in off of that good win against Barrett. And he felt like he went in there again as a challenger and he took the belt off of him. So Ogawa, and also, the Ogawa fight, it was an amazing knockout, something that we'll talk about for years to come. But there was always that criticism, especially in the press, that could it have been a fluke? Social media, could it have been a fluke? And I think he went in with the Rakhimov fight with something to prove, actually. I think he wanted to show the people that actually he's not a one-trick pony and he can fight. And Rakhimov presented a different style. And there were going to be times where he was going to have to get in deep water. Rakhimov never took his foot off the gas. He took a lot of punishment in the early rounds and later rounds, but he made Joe work for it, and he did what champions do, and they never give up. And Joe kind of had to go through that, and he answered a lot of questions from any critics. So I think he did a really good job. And now he's like, what's next? I don't really want to discuss a voluntary defense against Barrett. Barrett lost against Rakhimov. Does it really make sense? What am I going to gain from it? People are kind of going to feel that I'm already going to win that fight. So what am I going to get from it? Lara was presented to us, again, coming off the back of a loss, moving up away. Doesn't really feel like it presents much. So I think the next big fight for us, if we can't get a unification, would be to get the winner of probably Wood Lara, if that fight happens. And I think from what I'm hearing, that fight is going to happen. And we're going to hopefully try and negotiate a deal for the winner to fight Joe Cordina.
Would that be Wood Warrington?
Yeah, sorry, Wood Warrington. Yeah,
perfect. I mean, that fight with Warrington as well. Even if Lee ends up fighting Kolmatov as well, and Warrington becomes available sooner. I mean, what a fight that would be with Warrington obviously winning the the IBF world title in the weight division below. I can't see that being a very difficult fight to make from an IBF perspective anyway. And I mean the Welsh fans and the Leeds fans, I think they might have to do a football pitch kind of segregation on that fight. I think that would be unbelievable.
Yeah, and they're the kind of fights Joe wants to be in. He wants to be in football stadium fights. That's the dream, especially for UK fighters. We want to be in those open air football stadium, hostile environment fights that just generate the biggest financial purses. And that's what Joe wants to be a part of. And for him, that's either a unification or that's going to be against a huge domestic name in probably the winner of Wood Warrington.
Perfect. I mean, would Joe, like, I'm sure Joe would fight anyone. I think he'd fight in a phone box. But like, if obviously Josh Warrington makes a mistake, he sold out Ellen Road before. I know as the champion, you wouldn't want to go to Ellen Road, but if that would make kind of monetary and financial sense to go there, would that be an option for you guys?
I think when you're at this stage and at this level, if it's like a voluntary, you have to be, you probably want to keep it on home turf, and you kind of want to keep it with safe, kind of in a safer environment. But actually at this level, I think what you end up looking at is like, look, the fight's high risk anyway. So let's just go with wherever the biggest gate is and whatever's going to gross the biggest amount of money, because this is what these guys do. They do it for a bit. This is a business and this is their job. And ultimately keeping the belt's one thing, but also just generating life-changing money for you and your family is what you really get into the sport for once you've won the title. So for me, if we have to go to Ellen Road and that does 15, 20,000, that makes the most amount of money, great. If we have to go to Cardiff and that does 15 or 20,000, great. What I'm focusing on here is one, making sure Joe Cordina gets what he deserves out of the game. And he's already become a two-time world champion. He's got dreams of unifying, but ultimately unifying doesn't pay your mortgage off. You need to make sure you're in those big financial fights. And he needs to get something out of this game. He's in his 30s now. He's done the hard graft, went through the GB system, did all the international tournaments, went to the Olympics, fought all the way from British, Commonwealth, right through to World Championship level. He's achieved everything he set out to achieve when he was a kid. But as an adult, he needs to financially secure his family for the rest of their life. And that's the biggest goal now.
100%. And I think a Warrington fight is probably if not outside of unification, one of the biggest fights for him on that regard. I mean, my last couple, Charlie. We'll move on to kind of I'd say the younger guns in the gym, kind of the more fresher pros. So we'll start off with Maisey Rose Courteney. I mean, very dominant performance in Newcastle, and then a career best performance in Ireland as well.
Yeah, great card for her to go on. Obviously, looked up to Katie Taylor. She's been a huge inspiration to Maisey, so I think she was a little bit humbled and quite in awe of Katie when she went on that card, as anyone would be. She had it was her best performance in terms of the level she was fighting at, but I think she would have walked away from that fight and realised she's still got stuff to work on. So there's a lot of stuff to do in the gym, but she's certainly going to be a force in that division. You know, you look at people like George Liddard as well, who's in and around that gym, one of the new young guns coming through. He's had a good run. You know, I think he's had 3 fights, 3 KOs. He's going to be out again in August, as will Maisey Rose. They were meant to go on the Fabio Wardley card, but it seems that they're probably going to get placed on another card in August now as well. So, yeah, them two are kind of making their way through the learning phases. You know, they're kind of getting them fights in, starting to figure out who they are as a pro, what's their style. They're kind of watching the older guys in the gym and trying to figure out how you conduct yourself as a high performance athlete. So they've got a good team around them, and they've got every chance to go on and do great things in the sport. Jimmy Sains will be another addition, somebody that you'll be hearing a lot about. He'll be joining the Matchroom gym in probably the next few months. So he's another one to keep a lookout on. He's going to be operating in the super middleweight division as well. Very, very talented boxer. I'm very excited to see him turn pro.
Definitely. I mean, if you haven't seen Jimmy's KOs, I think in the Tri Nations, I mean, get on them. They are pinned on his Instagram. I mean, unbelievable. He is turning into a bit of a KO artist as well. Very excited to see Jimmy in the professional ranks. Last two, Calum French again was on the Newcastle card with Maisey and on Cyrus Pattinson as well. Solid performance off of an injury. I know he wasn't too happy with it, but talk to me about Callum's performance, and also when can we see him out next as well?
Yeah, another solid fight for Calum. It was kind of trying to bridge that gap a little bit between the 6 and the 10 rounds where he wants to get into. The problem is he picked up an injury in camp that he picked up towards the end of camp, and it was kind of one of them where, do you pull out or do you kind of go through with it? And he felt that he could go through with it. Obviously got the job done on the night. I think had he hadn't had that niggle, he probably could have got the guy out of there, but he's now gone through the recovery phase. He's had to have an operation on his shoulder. He's now rehabilitating that, and he's going to be back out towards the end of the year and as part of that new schedule. But very exciting fighter, great amateur, great pro style. He will be a force in his division, but he needs to get back to full health, and he needs to have some good rounds and camps under his belt before he starts looking at that kind of domestic scene, I think.
Perfect, and also part of the kind of the Berkeley boxing crew with Cyrus Pattinson up in Newcastle. And my final one, Charlie, talk about your sister Demi Sims. I mean, I know firsthand on how hard she's working in the gym on a Saturday, obviously with our sparring sessions as well, that I think doing the rounds on her social media. I mean, potential Misfits debut as well on the card as well. How exciting is that?
Yeah, I mean, she's been training very hard for the last few months. It kind of started as a bit of a hobby. And now, obviously, the rise of these influencer YouTube fighters, Misfits, it's kind of come a bit of a conversation of can she and will she. So she's been getting her rounds in with you in the gym. You've been her top sparring partner. So thank you for that. And yeah, hopefully she does. I think she's quite passionate about it. I think she'd actually be very good at it. So let's see where she goes in the next few months.
Perfect, definitely, and we look forward to seeing all the fighters in kind of the Matchroom Charlie Sims management team stable. Charlie, I know I've kept you for a long time today, mate. So thank you very much for your time, and yeah, catch up soon at the next fight night.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. It's been great talking, and I'll catch up with you soon.